Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Doring, Chris Brown, they are both here with me. We went through the ACC, the Big 10, and the Big 12. Let's continue over to the Big East. One moment while I stall and find the Big East tournament bracket. There it is. Villanova, the 1 seed. Creighton, the 2. Uconn gets the 3. St. John's at the 4. Shouts to the Johnnies. I mean, they stumbling down the stretch in a big way, but shouts to the Johnnies. And the fact that the number that they ended up with a 4 seed is just might be a commentary on the Big East this year. Before we get into the bracket, I want to ask you a question. Who's the best team in the Big East right now? Right this second, with Colin Gillespie hurt. Who's the best team in the Big East?
If I give my answer, then I'll reveal my winner. I'll reveal my winner. I'm doing it now. All right, Uconn.
Uconn, I love it. I love James Bouknight. Anyways, this is fascinating because A, the Big East wasn't that great this year anyways, and B, the team that was clearly the best team in the Big East this year just lost their most important player. Maybe not their best player, but their most important player. And then you have a Creighton team who, while they've been in the top 20 all year, I don't think anybody has talked about how impressive Creighton has looked at any point this year. Your 4 seed is a team like St. John's, who is in uncharted territory. Seton Hall hasn't been that impressive either. Uconn has looked good when James Bouknight has been there. It's a fascinating conference tournament. It really is, and I'm pumped for this one, even though this isn't going to be the headline for anybody, any casual college basketball fan. There might not be a tournament that is going to be, and you have a team like Xavier, who I think if there's no COVID would be much higher than 7th in this conference. Just they got hit hard. They had some struggles coming back. So you've got a Xavier team who's going to have to come all the way from the 7 seed and beat Creighton and Uconn en route to before they even get to the championship game, which is crazy to say as well. I'm pumped for this. Do you guys share that same sentiment?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the day that a team that's not supposed to make the NCAA tournament steals a bid in a high major conference. And this is about as optimistic as I've ever been. Not that it's going to happen, but right. You talked about, okay, so Xavier wouldn't be stealing a bid because they're probably going to get in if they do their job. But I am fascinated by this 4-5 St. John Seton Hall thing, because right now I think they're both on the outside looking in. St. John certainly is, and I would argue Seton Hall is pretty confidently too. But right, your 2 scariest teams are on the bottom half of this thing. If you win that game and you beat Villanova, you could very easily see one of those teams ending up in the final and very possibly winning this entire thing and probably taking somebody's NCAA tournament spot away. And St. John's has done enough to at least, again, sort of like Syracuse, make this interesting and be part of the bubble conversation if they can find a way to work some magic here.
Well, and the other part of this is that, yes, Villanova doesn't have Colin Gillespie, but Villanova is still 11th in the net. So that's still a quad 1 win, even if you don't. So, Seton Hall or St. John's have a very good chance to beat another bubble team and then have a quad 1 win against a team that, even though they are a quad 1 team, even though they have a quad 1 resume, they're not a quad 1 team right now in its current state. And I think we saw that in Villanova's last game. It was just pretty hard to watch without Colin Gillespie, and it's been kind of hard to watch without Colin Gillespie all year. So you're absolutely right. It's a fascinating conversation because Villanova's just not scary right now. They're just not. And there's an argument that Villanova hasn't been scary pretty much since we realized that they weren't the 3rd best team in the country like we thought they were. But even more so now without a guy like Gillespie, because St. John's and Seton Hall are on the outside looking in, but they're close enough that a couple wins and a win against Villanova at least makes the conversation really, really interesting. And then on the bottom side of the bracket, right, Creighton's a bad shooting night from being able to be beat by anybody. Just ask Butler, who's the 10 seed in this tournament. And Uconn is coming back to the Big East tournament. They've certainly looked like a tournament team with James Bouknight. they haven't looked like a tournament team without him, at least in my opinion. So I say that to say that a bad game from Book Night or a bad game laced with foul trouble turns into a really sticky situation for UConn as well. There are a lot of different ways that this thing could go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at those top teams, and the timing has never been, circumstances have never been better for a team in the bottom portion of that bracket or somewhere, something to surprise, like you guys said. Right, Villanova, Colin Gillespie, of course, but now Justin Moore is out for them, suffering what was Jay Wright described as a pretty severe, he used the word pretty severe, ankle sprain, and their loss at Providence over the weekend. That's the guy who was their main ball handler distributor with Gillespie out, and now he is dealing with a pretty significant injury. And Creighton, of course, right, like you said, poor shooting night away from being upset by anybody. They previously, before the Butler game over the weekend, had lost to Xavier and Villanova. We don't know the status of Greg McDermott potentially returning or not returning from his suspension. So there's just like the opportunity is just right there for one of several teams to capitalize. And there are a lot of teams that are in a position where a big run would change things for them, like a St. John's, for example.
With that being said, who's going to win it? Chris, you go first.
So I sort of hinted at this revealed it before. I'm going with UConn.
Okay.
I think the circumstances are there. And, I can make it really simple. Of course, I'm not saying that this is a team that can win in a million ways, which is, of course, something I like when they have a lot of paths to victory. They need James Bouknight to be good. They need him to be great.
And that dude's awesome.
And he has been great. And yes, there's vulnerability because any one player counting on him that much is risky. But, he scored 20 points in 4 of the last 5 games he played in. And it's very simple. They're 4-4 without him. They're 10-2 with him this season. 10-2. And they've won 4 of their last 5 games by double digits in the Big East. They split the regular season series against Creighton, and they lost to Villanova by like 6 or 8 points back when Gillespie was still, of course, in the lineup and for them. I think that Bouknight...
That was Bouknight's first game back, too.
Yep.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Maybe not his first, but he was still...
Second game back.
You could tell he wasn't 100%, to your point, Chris.
Right. And, they're just a different team with him in the lineup. It really is that simple, I think. And I think in a potential matchup with Creighton, he might be able to counter Marcus Zagorowski's impact just enough. I'm not saying...
Exceed.
Yeah.
UConn is the best player on the floor in that matchup. They just do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, UConn.
I love that, and I'm gonna help strengthen your point a little bit here because I think we would agree that UConn's biggest hurdle is Creighton, not Villanova or whoever would come out of the top side of that bracket. In their game against Creighton this year that James Bouknight played in, 40 points on 13 of 24 shooting, 5 3-pointers, went to the free throw line 12 times, and guess who doesn't play defense? Creighton's guards. Guess who really needs to play defense in that game? Creighton's guards, right? So I mean, we've got a really interesting. I love the pick because, right, the best team in the conference all year in its current form is not the best team in the conference. The second best team in the conference has things up in the air with their coach and is also pretty one-dimensional in terms of how they beat good teams. And then you got a third team that has the best player in the conference, at least in my opinion. And if he had played all year, he would have been the Big East Player of the Year. So you've got 3 different teams that one of them is they're just not the 1 seed in their current state if you were to rank these teams from best to worst. And the other 2 teams have outlying circumstances that make them very, very close. So I love the pick. Josh, who's your pick?
I went with Creighton because I had to somewhere in here not go with the logical pick because all 6 logical picks aren't going to win.
Sure.
Right. To me, UConn is absolutely the logical pick. I completely agree with the case that you're both laying out there. I still think Creighton has a higher ceiling when they shoot the ball well and do what they do best. Now the question is, can they actually do that? Because sometimes the answer is no. And it seems as if this Greg McDermott situation has galvanized them much more than it has divided them. That it doesn't seem to be an internal issue right now from
Mhm.
what you've seen players say, the way that they've responded. So I, regardless of how that ends up playing out, I don't think it's going to be a distraction for them.
Okay.
So I'm gonna bank on the high upside
Sure.
and that they get one good night when they need it against UConn and then are just better than every other team they're going to play.
Mhm.
I did go with UConn. Um, top 30 in offense and defense, and Creighton has a top 12 offense and a top 50 defense. And I think, I mean, Creighton has losses to, an ugly loss to Villanova, another loss to Xavier. That, they just have these games where they don't, they have a Georgetown loss, they have a Providence loss, they have a Butler loss, they have a Marquette loss. All of those which are not, I mean, Georgetown, Providence, Marquette, and Butler are seeds 8, 9, 10, and 6. And the only reason Providence is 6 because Xavier didn't play enough games. Um, when James Bouknight is there, UConn's the more consistent team.
Oh, for sure.
And I'll bet on that. I will. And when there are outlying circumstances, what I know about UConn is they got the best player in the conference, in my opinion, and he's healthy, and they've looked like the second best team in this conference when he's on the floor. And Chris just pointed that out with based on their record, and they're moving right now, and I think that the momentum that getting a guy like Bouknight brings a team, it's just rejuvenating. I know it's been a little while since he came back at this point, but to have him come back and you see once again the team that you are when he's on the floor, I think that's valuable as well. So I'm going with the Huskies. And it's a shame that they have to play in the semifinal and not the final, because I really think those are the two
Yep.
teams best equipped at this very moment to win the tournament. And then of course Villanova has Jay Wright, so there's always a chance that Villanova just does Jay Wright team things. But based on what we saw without Colin Gillespie, I think it would be silly to predict them to win 3 straight games in this Big East tournament at this moment. So UConn, and the Blue Jays. That sounds just about right. Let's go to the Pac-12. I got to scroll back up, I think. You know what? I found the SEC bracket first. We're going to the SEC next. Number 1 seed Alabama, number 2 seed Arkansas, 3 LSU, 4 Tennessee. They also have the 25 minutes after game 2, game 3, game 6 thing. I like that. Florida 5, and then we get to Ole Miss at 6, Missouri 7, which is crazy how we talked about Missouri at one point in the season, and here we are. And they're in a relatively similar place to where they always are in the SEC tournament. But yeah, Alabama the 1, Arkansas the 2. And then we go from there. Mr. Brown, what say you about the SEC tournament? What jumps out to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it was like some of these other conferences we've talked about, a pretty clear choice between 2 teams, Alabama and Arkansas. Neither team winning would surprise me. In the end, my call, which I'll save for a minute, wasn't too difficult. But you look at these 2 teams. You have Alabama projected 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. Arkansas projected 3 seed. Alabama 8th in the most recent AP poll. Arkansas 12th. Both these teams have largely been playing well to end the season. It hasn't been quite as smooth for Alabama, but the last few games at least they have been working. They have been playing well. So I do look at Alabama, and in sort of weighing these 2 teams, I do see a final month that wasn't as great as, of course, their 10-0 start to conference play. You're not going to sustain that. So, this is an Alabama team that's very talented, but I'm not, I'm not super, super high on. But I'll save my actual pick for, Arkansas, of course, is the hotter team, the scorching team right now. really it comes down to those two teams in my eyes. But yeah, that's those are my first thoughts.
The other team I'm interested in is Ole Miss. Got all the way up to the
Mm-hmm.
6th seed. And if you're looking for somebody to cause some chaos, that's where I'd put my money.
Mm-hmm.
They could do it.
They
Yeah.
haven't been good this year, but they've really started to put some things together here at the end and are in a conference where a lot of teams are uninspiring. They've been rather inspiring lately.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that I'm interested in what they can do and what happens if they make a deep run and what that conversation becomes. Now they got to get through LSU to get to Arkansas theoretically, so they got some work to do to get out of the second round where they should beat South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
But that's sort of the wild card interesting team for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, I've been talking about this all year. Which Alabama team are we getting? Because
Mm-hmm.
now they've been the Alabama team that is a top 10 team in the country more times than I've probably given them credit for, which is valid. But they also, like, the 10-game stretch that turned Alabama into what Alabama has ultimately become is because they shot the lights out and they played great defense. But it's undoubtable that they are vulnerable when they don't shoot the ball well because they depend so much on the three-pointer, and that offense, there's a direct correlation between how scary that offense looks and how many three-pointers are going down. Because if they shoot it well, nobody's going to beat them, and nobody is in the SEC's beat them all year when they shoot it well. And most teams, when they only shoot it okay, they've still been, Alabama's still been able to beat pretty much everybody. But when they've played good teams like Oklahoma, like Arkansas, when they don't shoot it incredibly well, they're vulnerable. And I've liked, like, Oklahoma was the tougher team in that game, in a close one, right? They were just the tougher team. And when I'm picking teams to win multiple games in tournaments, that's one of the things I'm going to look at. So that's where my eyes went immediately when looking at the SEC tournament. But let's predict, Josh, who's winning the SEC tournament?
Arkansas.
The Razorbacks. Get on the Must Bus, baby.
Give me the hot team that's playing the best basketball in the conference. And yeah, Alabama maybe has a higher ceiling, but since we got past that 10-0 start, it's not like Alabama has done this thing where they'll win 7 in a row and then lose 3 in a row. They get a couple good games and then a bad one, and then they bounce back and they have another bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Which to me screams they're going to have one bad game in this tournament. And because their offense is entirely built around the three-pointer, that spells trouble, as you've been harping on for a long time, Josh. I'm just not sure Arkansas is going to have a bad game with the way they're playing right now. And there aren't the only team I can look at and say, well, they could just outplay Arkansas on any given day, and you just got to sort of put your hands up and say they were the better team. We couldn't do anything about it. Is Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So if Alabama shoots the lights out, Alabama's going to win that game. But if that doesn't happen, I'm taking Arkansas.
Yeah.
And I just don't have faith that it's going to line up the way Alabama needs it to, because I think Arkansas has the edge right now, and Alabama has to do something to take the initiative, also known as shooting the ball really well, to put themselves in a position to be the most dangerous team in this conference right now, on any given day, kind of thing.
Sure.
Their ceiling is higher, but if I'm just putting those two teams on the floor, I'm giving Arkansas 6 or 7 out of those 10 matchups, probably.
Chris.
I'm going with the Razorbacks as well. This is a team I think I had them as my winner in winners and losers a week or so ago. They haven't lost since January 30th. Eric Musselman knows what it takes to win in March. The consistency has been there. They have a leading scorer in Moody who's scoring about 18 points a game. He can get 25 plus. 4 other players averaging 9 plus points a game. Another 2 that are averaging 7 plus a game. I mean, they've got so many players that can be contributors for them, and a leading scorer who can go score 25 plus. Their fast pace, their effectiveness beyond the arc, it's hard to slow them down. And I completely agree with your assessment, Josh. In terms of the ceiling, yeah, Alabama has the higher ceiling if everything goes right, but I just can't bet on that lasting. I want the team that's coming in scorching hot that I just don't really have any reason to believe is going to slow down versus the team with the higher ceiling, but as we've seen all season, has vulnerabilities to just randomly here and there without any sort of real clues as to when it's going to be, just have a bad game when that doesn't work out. So I'm right there with you in that logic. I'm going Arkansas.
It's another. I mean, it's just like Creighton and Uconn. Creighton has the better.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a flip flop, but the team that's top 30 in both offensive and defensive efficiency in the SEC is Arkansas. It's not Alabama. Now, Alabama's 8th at KenPom because they're 3rd in defensive efficiency, but they're 41st in offensive efficiency, and that just is what happens when you need to shoot the three really well to be scary on offense. Because if you don't shoot it well, then you're just not super efficient, right? So needless to say, I'm also going with the Razorbacks. Give me the team that I have a smaller window of where this team is going to perform, right? If that makes sense. The spectrum of where Arkansas is going to perform is much narrower than where Alabama is, and I will take that team in a single elimination tournament almost every time compared to that other team that I need them to be a certain way for, to beat a bunch of quality basketball teams in a row. And, beside that, Arkansas, like you said, Chris, it's been forever since they lost, and that was a 4-point loss on the road to an Oklahoma State team who is going to be a top 4 seed, right? So the last time they lost to a team in the to an SEC team was all the way back on January 16th when they lost to Alabama. So it's been a really long time since they've lost to an SEC team, and the loss that they took in the middle there was a loss that has done nothing but become more respectable since January 30th when they lost to Oklahoma State. So I'm going with them as well. Last but not, go ahead.
One thing, there's also Kentucky sitting there as the 8th seed.
I mean, we're talking about a 10 and 15 Kentucky team.
Yeah, but that team can knock off Alabama if Alabama has a bad shooting night. I don't love that if I'm Nate Oates.
Sure.
Before we even talk about potentially having to play Arkansas.
Right.
And there's Tennessee on that side too. There are teams that could just beat Alabama before Arkansas even has to worry about it. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. Last but not least, out in the West Coast, it's kind of appropriate that the last game that we talk about is the Pac-12, because the Pac-12 is pretty much the last conference that everybody talks about. But number 1 seed Oregon, number 2 USC, 3 Colorado, 4 UCLA. I will say that those are 4 quality basketball teams. Now that we get to bad teams pretty quickly when talking about Oregon State is the 5 seed in the Pac-12 tournament. Oregon State is the 5 seed. And then you get to Stanford's and Utah and Arizona State. Remember, once upon a time, Arizona State was a top 15 team in the country. That was forever ago. But there are some quality basketball teams at the top of the Pac-12 tournament. Oregon, USC, Colorado, UCLA. But what say you about Mr. Doring? What are you looking for in the Pac-12 tournament?
The team I'm interested in more than anything else is UCLA. They just lost all the other good teams in the conference. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden they're kind of on the bubble again and not entirely safe. They need to beat Oregon State. I think they're okay if they beat Oregon State, but they need to beat Oregon State or else it's not going to be a comfortable selection Sunday for Mick Cronin. And can they turn it around and actually beat somebody good here down the stretch? Because they just had the opportunities and all of them went to waste. So that's the team I'm most curious about.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, UCLA was the team I'm most curious about as well. So I don't have a ton to add there. I'm right there with you in that assessment of there being 4 quality teams atop that conference. It really wouldn't surprise me if any of the 4 of those teams win this conference tournament. I mean, and maybe, when we get into our predictions here, maybe you guys will have stronger feelings than myself about who the best team in that conference really is. And if there's a team here really capable of making, a deep NCAA tournament run or anything like that. For me, I find it really hard to not differentiate, but I find it hard to find a team that really inspires me significantly more than the others in that conference. So yeah, UCLA though, that's the team that came to my mind first.
Let's pick winners.
All
Mr.
right.
Doring.
I'm going with the Ducks.
The Ducks, Dana Altman.
we've been talking about this on our podcast that this was never a bubble team, and they ended up, winning the conference, even though they were on the bubble a couple weeks ago with 4 or 5 games left to play, just because they hadn't gotten the games, and then they won all their games, and now they're looking pretty good. But they've had the combination of injuries and COVID stop starts. It's just been a mess. This is a much better team than they have shown most of the season, and now they're finally starting to play up to their potential. That's part of it, is that they've already been through so much that now it's starting to come together. And secondly, as we've mentioned before, we're talking about Andy Enfield's USC and Colorado, who's been good the past couple of years, but not at the top of the Pac-12. I'll take the guy who makes a living off of overachieving in March. Dana Altman's one of those guys that I just bet on that Oregon team, because they always find a way somehow, it seems like, to end up in the Sweet 16, Elite 8. Doesn't matter. 3 seed, 4 seed, 5 seed. Usually they win the Pac-12 regular season, take care of business in this tournament. So I'm going with the guy who knows how to navigate this stuff, and the team that is better than their resume indicates.
Yeah, I mean, Will Richardson, Chris Duarte, LJ Figueroa, Eric Williams, and Eugene Omoruyi. That's the best starting 5 in the conference. I mean, USC is the best player, but Dana Altman, right, not only winning multiple games in March, but controlling the Pac-12. You just said that it's been a mess all year, and Oregon still found a way to win the Big 12. Not the Big 12, the Pac-12, right? I mean, that's all you need to know about Dana Altman and his, making it a habit, winning the Pac-12, or at least being one of the best teams in the Pac-12 and finding a way to be a really big part of the story. Chris, who's your winner?
Yeah, you guys have laid out a strong case, and so part of me's tempted to change my mind, but I'm going to stick with USC. I'm going with the team that has won more Pac-12 games than any other team this season. Coming off the buzzer beater win over UCLA over the weekend, they also have wins over BYU, UCLA, as I mentioned, and Oregon this year. Now, they only played once against Oregon, but they won that, and it was at home, but they won that game by 14 points. And it wasn't really that long ago. This was February 22nd. I'm going with USC. I think, like you said, Josh, they have the best player. Oregon has the best overall starting 5, so that certainly wouldn't surprise me. And part of me is tempted to flip my pick, but I'm going to stick with it. I think I have good reason to stick with USC.
Cool. I'm going to go with Oregon. Dana Altman. It was the team I had the most faith in at the beginning of the season, and despite everything that's happened since the beginning of the season, sure, they have a couple bad losses, but it's, I think, a lot of what's happened to Oregon to maybe make you scratch your head is a result of the pandemic and the unpredictable nature of how the season was going to go. But I'll stick with Dana Altman, because really he's the only coach here who has proven to me he can win a bunch of games in the Pac-12 tournament and the NCAA tournament. So I'll stick with the Ducks, and specifically Dana Altman.